Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Switch to the phone company that supports your beliefs. All plans start under $50 before taxes and surcharges. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special offer.
When Cardinal Robert Prevost was elected Pope, the first stories that emerged about his time as Cardinal Archbishop in Peru was his role in hiding away Ted McCarrick kinds of problems in the priesthood. Evil men who had no business being priests. His handling of those cases and such. In fact, the story broke during the conclave when some observers kind of got a hint that that was where the conclave was going to go. And the story suddenly took on a new life in light of this news story yesterday. There were two stories that really broke in the last 24 hours that now necessitate us talking about this. And the first comes to us from the CatholicReview.org under the headline, Pope Leo meets with coalition of survivors of evil deeds by clergy. There's a picture of the Pope meeting with various survivors of this or their family members. Now, you're going to hear him say all the right things, and that's good. He should say the right things. He should treat this seriously. But words and deeds are not the same thing. They aren't. So we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to go over the story, because the other story that happened is a news outlet out of Europe that we frequently use on this channel, right after the conclave, broke the story in Europe about his past, covering these stories and covering up for these problems. And they got shredded for it. And then they were vindicated. And that happened yesterday. So let's go to the main story first. I'll start to paint you the picture here. It's not a bad thing that the Pope met with these people at all. Just for the record, for those who are going to be critical of it. From the article, quote, Pope Leo XIV met with a coalition of those who have survived the evil deeds done by priests and victims' advocates for the first time at the Vatican October 20th. Members of the board of Ending This Problem met with the Pope for about an hour in a closed-door meeting that was later confirmed by the Vatican. This was a deeply meaningful conversation, Gemma Hickey, ECA board president and survivor of clergy abuse in Canada, said in a press release. It reflects a shared commitment to justice, healing, and real change. Survivors have long sought a seat at the table, and today we felt heard, she said in a statement. Pope Leo was very warm. He listened, Hickey said at a news conference, according to Reuters. We told him that we come as bridge builders, ready to walk together toward truth, justice, and healing. While the group of 6 people representing ECA met with the Pope, video clips from the Vatican also showed a separate meeting between Pope Leo and Pedro Salinas, a Peruvian journalist and someone who survived this stuff himself. Salinas, a former board member of Sodalitum Christiani Vitae, remember that organization, by the way, as we tell the story, who suffered physical and psychological harm by the movement's founder, Luis Fernando Fagari, is seen in the footage giving the Pope a copy of his new book, The Truth Sets Us Free, in Spanish. The book recounts his attempts to bring to light the truth about the movement, which was eventually suppressed. They are considered kind of a right-wing post-conciliar order in Spain, and they got hammered with this stuff and crushed in ways that if the Legionnaires of Christ had been given the same treatment, nobody would have really blinked. But this group, probably because of their rigidity and clericalism, was treated the way any order that has a problem of like a deep-seated problem, not just like one priest, but like a deep-seated institutional problem in that organization, the way they should all be treated. But unfortunately, that's not the case here. The International Coalition of Survivors and Human Rights Advocates work to end this problem, enforcing accountability, and promote justice and truth, according to its website. They have been a big proponent of zero-tolerance policies and solving the problem at its root, not just confronting a new case whenever it happens, but actually looking deeper involved in fighting the problem at its root. Now, the problem at its root is, of course, that 99.9% of those harmed by priests are teenage men. And they're, of course, harmed by a priest, which means men. There's a word for that. You're not allowed to point it out on these platforms, but James Martin's the cheerleader for the church changing its teaching on that whole subject. And it's like, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's 99% of the cases. Something worth thinking about here. But of course, Pope Leo has a long history of this. So this problem himself, not him being No credible reports of him having engaged in these deeds himself, instead of being the person who kind of hides these away. We'll go first to the most credible report on this, where a lot of us who kind of had a negative reaction, we'll say, on Conclave Day, when he was announced as the Pope, why we did. This is from the College of Cardinals report. It's all the summary data you would ever really want about any candidate. Here's the relevant section. Again, the College of Cardinals report was written by very mainstream figures, very moderate to kind of conservative figures who were doing the best they could to honestly present a profile of each candidate to help the College of Cardinals make a better decision. With this information, this is the decision the Cardinals made from Cardinal Prevost's bio in the College of Cardinals report. On key topics, Cardinal Prevost says little, but some of his positions are known. He is reportedly very close to Francis's vision regarding the environment, outreach to the poor and migrants, and meeting people where they are. He said last year, quote, "The bishop is not supposed to be a little prince sitting in his kingdom." Prevost appears somewhat less favorable to currying favor with the James Martin crowd than Francis. Notice the phrasing there is somewhat less favorable. That doesn't mean he's against them. But he showed mild support for fiducia supplicans. Prevost has faced some controversy regarding the Ted McCarrick problem, although he has also been defended in both instances. The Cardinal supporters stress his innocence and say the cases have been inaccurately and unfairly reported in the media. The first case involves his handling of some of these cases during his time as a provincial of the Augustinian province of Chicago, when a priest convicted of harming those too young to consent was allowed to stay at an Augustinian priory near an elementary school and continue functions as a priest until later removed, and then laicized in 2012. However, Prevost is said to have never authorized that particular situation. The priest was not Augustinian, and it took place before the Dallas Charter. The Dallas Charter was the document that was spearheaded by Ted McCarrick, of all people. I'm not joking about that, by the way. But Ted McCarrick, the principal monster at the time, on how to prevent more monsters from doing the things that they did and how to handle situations as they rise. They literally had the wolf helping draft a document on how to protect the sheep from wolves. More recently, questions were raised about Prevost's knowledge and handling of similar allegations in his former diocese of Chiclayo, that's in Peru. 2 priests were accused of harming 3 young girls, with the allegations surfacing in April 2022 during Prevost's tenure as bishop. The case has been a source of frustration for local Catholics due to its slow progress and unclear resolution. Some accusers have claimed Prevost failed to properly investigate the allegations and hid away the accused priest, but the diocese has firmly denied this, stating that Prevost followed proper procedures. They stated that he personally received and attended to the victims, reportedly opened an initial canonical investigation. As an aside, I do personally believe he did meet with the victims and then open that investigation. But there's a lot of other problems that could have happened with this while he did that himself. He also encouraged the victims to take the case to the civil authorities. In July of 2022, Prevost sent the results of the investigation to the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith for review. His supporters stressed that he has documents from the DDF and Papal Nunciature in Peru, which also indicate that he was not only attentive to the presumed victims, but that he did all required in church law following procedures set out for these cases. However, in May of 2025, allegations emerged. This is right before the conclave. They had to update this document when it happened, that the diocese paid $150,000 to the 3 girls to silence them. Described as longtime public critics of Prevost, the girls reportedly blamed Prevost for hiding away the deeds of their priest. And it goes on to Infovaticana, which we'll actually go to their article directly here in a second. But that is from the College of Cardinals report on this. And that all sets the stage for the real question here. And that is he the best person to be meeting with those harmed by priests and handling this problem? Every Vatican II pope, every post-Vatican II pope, to some degree had to deal with this problem. And it got worse and worse and worse until it exploded in the latter years of John Paul II and pretty much torpedoed Benedict's papacy. Francis did some things that helped the problem on the surface, but there is also the lingering allegation that merely this stuff started getting handled behind the scenes in ways not too dissimilar to the way they were done before, just with people a little more savvy about it. Meanwhile, some bishops have independently taken it upon themselves to screen more hard for James Martin inclinations and tendencies among their seminarians to prevent these kind of men from getting into the priesthood to begin with. And that is a concrete step that we should all be very thankful for. Now imagine this. We've all seen this with a different news outlet, LifeSite News. LifeSite has repeatedly broken news stories, and then those who are affected by the news story, who are the subject of the news story, will attack not the story, but they will undermine the story by attacking the messenger, in this case, LifeSite, claiming they have no credibility, that they're ideological, that they do sloppy journalism, all the rest of it, in an attempt to bury the story. And that is what happened here with Infovaticana. So we go here to the story that was published back in April. By April 2nd, when this article was published, it was becoming pretty obvious that Francis wasn't going to be with us for much longer. There were people like me who were saying, no, with the way things are going, he'll be around for another 5 years. He wasn't around for another 5 weeks. Okay. And no, I didn't take joy in his passing away. I actually chastised people for that. But it was pretty clear with the behavior of the cardinals in Rome that they were getting ready for a conclave. And this article happened in the pre-conclave, pre-interregnum preparation phase. The headline from Infovaticana was Cardinal Robert Prevost reported to the Vatican for allegedly hiding away McCarrick kinds of deeds. Now, interestingly enough, they went in after the fact and edited the caption of the image to call him Pope Leo XIV. Obviously, he wasn't Pope Leo XIV on April 2nd, 2025. But this involves an organization called SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Harmed by Priests. They filed a formal complaint with the Vatican against Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, prefect of the dicastery for bishops and president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, for alleged acts of hiding away cases of evil deeds of these kind committed by clerics. Here are the details of this. Again, this is the man who was just meeting with the survivors. The complaint sent to the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and other senior Roman Curia officials alleges that Prevost allowed priests accused of this to remain in ministry involving minors without informing civil authorities or taking the necessary steps to protect the victims. Of the cases mentioned in the complaint is that of Father James Ray, who according to the Illinois Attorney General's 2023 report, has 13 allegations of harming the most young. This is the one where his defender said that and pointed out that the priest was not an Augustinian and that there were things that were outside of Prevost's control here. However, in 2000, under the supervision of then provincial of the Augustinians in Chicago, Robert Prevost, he was allowed to reside in a convent or short distance from a Catholic school without informing the school administration of his background. Now you're seeing she and her used here. That's because Infovaticana is a Spanish language outlet, and the translation extension of my browser is having a little bit of a difficulty with very basic things, which is weird. The document also refers to accusations in the Diocese of Chiclayo, Peru, when Prevost served as bishop, which this newspaper has reported on. They've got a link to another article. It mentions the priest Eleuterio Vasquez Gonzalez and Ricardo Yeskin, accused by several women of harm dating back to 1997. According to the complaint, the victims reported the incidents in 2022, but Prevost failed to initiate a proper investigation or inform civil authorities. The DDF subsequently closed the case in August 2023, after the statute of limitations for the crimes of Peruvian courts had expired. So that's a key feature of this story. He was reported to the DDF, but then, and remember, this was in 2022. And then what, a year later, 10 months later, whatever it was, they closed the case because the Peruvian courts statute of limitations had expired. And so the DDF, which was not bound by the same statute, closed the case too. Most peculiar. The organization here, for the Victims Advocacy Organization, has requested the Vatican launch a thorough investigation in Cardinal Prevost's conduct and the results be made public. At this point, you and I know that will never happen. The organization also called for the appointment of an independent investigator to ensure the impartiality of the process. The situation is causing concern within the church as Prevost, in his current role, is responsible for overseeing investigations against other bishops under the Vos Estis Lex Mundi regulation, meaning at the time, you'll remember Cardinal Prevost was the cardinal prefect for the dicastery of bishops. He was supposed to work with Cardinal Fernandez to investigate these kind of allegations. So this is what happens when the sheriff is accused of hiding away criminal activity, and criminal activity of a kind that he himself is supposed to investigate. That's what happens. Now, this goes on, of course. In the aftermath of that article and other articles afterwards published by Infovaticana, and I know because I've actually had conversations with one of the writers from Infovaticana behind the scenes about this, they were shredded in the same way that I've alluded to about LifeSite News. LifeSite would get a breaking news story that gets a lot of attention, and then they get shredded, and people try to destroy their credibility or destroy the story because LifeSite has a clear bias in their reporting. They don't hide their bias. They're a traditional Catholic outlet in a modern church. That means they have a bias. And then the story went away, right? Well, and then the Infovaticana published this yesterday. Headline: SNAP, that's the agency that we're talking about here. That's the Victims Advocacy Group, sent the Prevost report, as they're calling it, to the Vatican in April. The thesis that it was all a hoax was discredited, meaning they now have the proof that it's all real, all of it. That a victims advocacy organization did contact the DDF. The accusation from those defending Prevost was that this was all just made up. None of this was real. It was a hoax. Infovaticana has the proof that this was all real. And when you think about that for a moment, what would it mean if, we'll just call him Bishop X. I don't want to drag any bishop's name through the mud here. Let's say a bishop who is known as being mild-mannered, being very friendly, pro-Francis on some things in terms of some of his more dicey things, not so much on other things, but not known to raise a problem in the United States. Known as generally a bishop who you think would take things seriously. What would happen if LifeSite News had issued an article detailing how he had swept these things away? Advocacy groups had gone to the courts, the church courts and the secular courts, and the statute of limitations had run out. And then his defenders, who all of a sudden were all the James Martin types in the church, weirdly enough, decided to shred the outlet in defense of the bishop, calling it a hoax. And then everybody bought it and the story went away. And then it turned out to not have been a hoax in the first place, that they, as the kids say, brought the receipts. How would that go over? So why different for Cardinal Prevost? Here's the details of this. I will have all the links today in my show notes at returntotradition.org or the Anthony Stine Substack if you want to read them. These articles are originally in Spanish. You'll need a translating extension or use a website like DeepL or Grok or ChatGPT or something to translate the articles for you if you can't read Spanish. I'm using a translation extension from Google Chrome. Verified evidence confirms that the document was submitted by the Victims Advocacy Organization to the Secretary of State in April 2025. Days before the conclave, Infovaticana published a report exposing serious deficiencies in the handling of a very young harm case when Robert Prevost was Bishop of Chiclayo. The document detailed significant omissions in the handling of the notorious Luta case, a monster priest who harmed two girls, ages 9 and 11, taking them to an isolated mountain retreat where he made them sleep in the same bed and then did unspeakable things to them. There are testimonies that the priest took others there too. The investigation remains open, and the victims have recently requested access to documents and evidence from the case. The publication triggered a coordinated media campaign that surprised those responsible for Infovaticana. Journalist Austin Ivere, whom I'm in the past, as an aside here, I've referred to as a Pope Francis fan fiction writer. He was the biographer for Pope Francis in the English-speaking world. He wrote numerous biographies on the man, had unprecedented access to him, and was also the lay chairman of one of the major continental synods on synodality. Major player in the Bergoglian Church. And he came to Prevost's defense here. Make note of that. Back to this. Journalist Austin Ivere was the first to personally criticize the news. It's a sodalicio campaign, he said. Remember that organization I told you to watch for? A kind of rigid right-wing organization, Novus Ordo priestly organization that was too rigid for its own good, maybe liked the traditional mass or at least traditional looking sacraments, and were crushed because they had their own problem with a priest. I'm not disputing that they should have been shut down for allegedly having a problem with that kind of a priest. It's just that they were handled in a much different manner than, say, the Legionnaires of Christ were, or maybe the Jesuits, who've had a lot of problems with these kind of priests. Days later, this same theory was repeated in several media outlets, including Religion Digital, Vida Nueva, and even El Pai, European outlets I've used on this channel many times, which insisted on this line a few days ago and is now facing a lawsuit from the victims for having manipulated a 2-hour recorded interview with journalist Paolo Nagovic, meaning news outlets selectively edited an interview with a journalist to attempt to cover for Cardinal Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, the content of which had nothing to do with what was published. The official biography of the Pope, written by journalist Elise Allen, also echoes the same theory. Everyone agrees on the story. The report was a hoax, a poisoning operation attributed to the so-called ecclesiastical far right. Coordinated media campaign to erase accusations leveled against the now Pope for things that should have disqualified him from candidacy at the conclave immediately. And I wouldn't care if they'd said this about Cardinal Robert Serra. If it had turned out that Cardinal Robert Serra was leading in the conclave and this came to light, this would have disqualified him too. Now, you and I both know Cardinal Serra wouldn't have actually handled a situation like this, but if he had, the point stands. However, Infovaticana has had access to conclusive evidence that completely refutes this version. One of them is an audio recording recorded in April 2025, in which a church official directly involved in the case acknowledges that it was SNAP, the well-known American organization for those harmed in the church, who sent the documents to the Vatican Secretary of State earlier that month. The objective, according to the recording, was for the text to reach the cardinals on the eve of a possible conclave, to report on the irregularities by Prevost in handling these complaints in Chiclayo. Infovaticana has verified the authenticity of the audio and compared its content with independent sources. The confirmation that SNAP was the source of the report leaves no room for interpretation. The complaint about Prevost's management came from an international victims organization with a long history defending people harmed by clergy, unrelated to Sodalacio de Vida Cristiana or any conservative group within the church. Founded in the US in the 1990s, SNAP has been one of the main platforms for denouncing Episcopal cover-ups and negligence worldwide, and its independence from any ideological current is beyond question. It is difficult to imagine an entity more removed from the so-called ecclesiastical far right with which the story was attempted to be linked. In addition to the documentary evidence, other elements reinforce the conclusion that the hoax theory is unfounded. None of the media outlets that disseminated it have presented any evidence linking Sodalacio, meaning the far-right group in Spain, to the preparation or dissemination of the report. It was all mere speculation, amplified by news outlets that, without verifying the facts, repeated the same slogan. It's all a far-right hoax. SNAP sent it to the Vatican. It wasn't Sodalacio. There can be no doubt. Meaning, an organization with high levels of credibility on this are the ones who sent the report to the Vatican in an attempt to make the cardinals aware ahead of the conclave. And it was all dismissed in a coordinated media campaign tied to churchmen. Where does that sound familiar? This is right out of the secular left-wing playbook for elections. We all talk about an October surprise, right? In elections in America. I'm sure if you're watching this in some other country, there's probably some equivalent. But in America, for those who may not, for some reason, be aware, it seems that right around the middle of October, right when those ballots are being mailed out in certain places, you suddenly have a news story, usually aimed at the conservative candidates, that essentially just tries to destroy them. It's like clockwork. That's what this looks like. That the bad news about Cardinal Prevost was given to the Cardinals, and immediately the media campaign used a right-wing ecclesial organization as their scapegoat, knowing full well that the balance of the bishops in the church under Francis leaned heavily towards progressive revolutionary type bishops. We know that Pope Francis appointed like 75% or something of the voting cardinals. So conservative organizations like this were going to be viewed with suspicion. It was very well done, the way they pulled this off. And my hope is that they bring this to the general public, that they publish the audio on their website. And to give you an idea how widespread this was, this attempt to hide these accusations away, well before the conclave. Note on this one, September 2024. We're talking a good 7 months before the conclave, before the passing of Francis, 8 months before the conclave. The headline from the National Catholic Reporter, Cardinal's former diocese denies claim of this problem. We went over the details of that in another article, so you get the idea. But how widespread was this dismissing of this? The tablet out of the UK, 15th of May, 2025, 1 week into his papacy. The story wasn't going away until this media campaign. Peruvian bishop defends Pope against claims of hiding the stuff away. Bishop Edinson Farfán of Chiclayo, Prevost's basic, believe he was an actual auxiliary bishop. I don't think by then Prevost had made an appointment, said claims that Robert Prevost failed to investigate the problem were false. Pope Leo XIV has been the most responsive to these cases in the Peruvian church, and he has listened to us. He's allowed us to achieve justice, says this bishop. The facts say otherwise. The facts say otherwise. And will this story get legs? The Infovaticana report. If you're watching this from Infovaticana, make the audio available if you are able to. Put it on your website, tweet it out, I don't care. Make it publicly available so that people can hear it for themselves. This needs to be out there. That's why I'm talking about it this morning. It needs to be out there. We need to know what we're dealing with. This has the potential to be much like the Vigano memo back in 2018. Ancient history now, it seems like. Back in 2018, Archbishop Vigano released his testimony, laying accusations against the feet of Pope Francis. The problem is this is coming from laymen and Snap. Snap has a lot of credibility. But it would be nice if there would be a bishop, a brave bishop in Peru, who would be willing to destroy his career. We'll use quotes about that because what they have is a vocation, not a career. But who would be willing to destroy his career, risking being canceled by telling the truth about this? Because that audio recording should be enough. We can see what you all have to say about this before we move on a little bit. SRM says, y'all hear about the Pope Leo hot mic moment saying the American bishops need to push for more illegal immigrants. About Pope Leo take them in. I'm down to pay for some flights. I did report on last week or the week before when he basically told the American bishops to resist Trump and stop him on the illegal immigration issue. So I didn't hear about specifically that hot mic moment. I may have seen an article in passing. If so, I'll probably cover it tomorrow, but this doesn't surprise me. It seems as if that's what he was put in for, was to continue Francis's work, and to really refocus it on the issue at hand. There was a meeting between Pope Francis and Cardinal Supich a day or two after the presidential election. At that meeting was Cardinal Robert McElroy and a few others. At the time, Cardinal Robert McElroy was a cardinal bishop, not archbishop, which was a peculiar thing, not unique in church history, but weird. He was the ordinary of the Diocese of San Diego, made a cardinal to make a political statement. A couple of days after that meeting, Cardinal McElroy was announced to be the new Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Cardinal McElroy is an outspoken critic of Trump and immigration. He has given, it seems like every third homily of his is about immigration. Since the election, the U.S. bishops have basically abandoned every other issue under the sun, including the Eucharist, it seems, and focused on immigration. Pope Leo gives a lot of homilies about immigration. So it doesn't surprise me. And it seems like what he was put in office for. Philip says news is always sanitized. It is. Harmony says it's right and just to care if the children are being harmed. I can't use that word too much on this channel, Harmony, but I know what you mean. It is something that we have a right to care about. Now, this is a story that actually has other implications to it. There's that common link between the McCarrick problem in the church and the James Martin topic, that sin that James Martin loves so much, that thinks the church got wrong. We've seen this become kind of weirdly institutionalized in the last few years, overtly and in your face. No greater example of this than from this story. Headline from cath.net, a sort of kind of milder life site news out of Austria and Germany. Finally, a strange service on television. If you hadn't heard the story, in Germany, they broadcast a mass for James Martin types on television. Because, of course, the state and government are not the same thing. The state is sort of the collection of institutions that control society, the government being the big one, but your major corporations are there too, as well as major nonprofits and other institutions. The church is not part of the state in the modern world, but your government, your contractors that have major connections to the government certainly are. And in this case, the state has a religion of its own, and the German bishops are full-throated supporters of this. And to the point where they categorically reject the church's teaching on the matter. They have actually explicitly said that the church needs to change the teaching on this sin in question. Here are the details. Quote, "Hooray! The first strange church service is being broadcast on German television, so one can worship the strange God live and in color. This is a social advance that can hardly be praised highly enough." I think they're being sarcastic here, by the way. This is not a left-wing paper. "For the information of all those who don't watch public broadcasting, despite having to pay compulsory fees for it, the services offered to the television God, hence the name television church services, are usually much more boring than the Sunday sermon." Yes, it is possible to be more boring than the Sunday sermon. The latter, when ARD still offered entertaining programs, was the country's most popular pee break. It was enough to relieve oneself and get a new beer from the fridge before moving on to news and sports. What the Sunday sermon is used for these days is unfortunately as unknown as the question of whether anyone even watches it. Broadcasts of church services have been as superfluous as a goiter, at least since the advent of KTV and EWTN. There's a reason for this. Since things can sometimes be different and even very different on television, quite a few nominally Catholic services are, to put it mildly, somewhat problematic. Besides, anyone whose parish has ever had television on Sundays knows what a stress it is. The next show has to start on time. Now, praise be to Saint Diversity. Saint Diversity. It is no longer a problem if the public television God becomes strange. Or is that God becoming telegenic? In any case, we're not discussing that. At this point, we'll put aside the biting irony and turn to a sober analysis of the problem. A ranking based on a study has shown that the German Catholic Church ranks 10th in terms of friendliness to the James Martin crowd among the ranking calls churches. This pleases the church, the community in question. If one uses the declaration Dominus Jesus as the basis for assessing what a church is in the full sense, one naturally arrives at different results. The study was authorized by the European Forum for James Martin-type Christian groups. They're not required to adhere to Catholic declarations and call themselves church whatever they wish. An honest look at the ranking shows how far the Catholic dioceses in Germany have distanced themselves from the universal church. This is a fact that should worry us. Quite a few experts see this greatest danger of schism in the way individual dioceses deal with the James Martin topic. The Pope recently expressed his disapproval in a book regarding the regulations on blessing James Martin type partnerships. There's no question that a book of interviews is not a doctrinal document, but why should the Pope express himself differently in a potential doctrinal letter than in an interview? We'll pause there. We've seen him do it already. Say one thing and then appoint bishops to do another. Words once say one thing, mean one thing. Actions mean another. But yes, they're going to have this mass on television in Germany. Which brings you to this question here. Dr. Peter Kwasniewski shared this data. Priestly ordinations in Germany, 2000 to 2024. He calls it generally a downward trend, but that's not generally a downward trend. If you were to draw a straight line from that point right there down that way, that's not a generally downward trend. That's a sharp downward trend. Yeah, you got a couple of peculiar bumps here. You know, the year Francis became Pope, you had a bit of a bump. You kind of got a bit of a bump in the first couple years of Benedict, but then it went back down after that. But the line has been consistent. Down, 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 down. It's a trend line that has not reversed yet. Just think of that. Only 29 ordinations for the entire country of Germany in 2024. Only 29. How could they only have 29 ordinations? Well, you see, if you want to be a Catholic priest, it does look to many people that if you want to be a Catholic priest, you actually got to go find Catholic bishops, and you won't find too many of those in Germany these days. I know that's a hot take for some people, but if they're going to be silent while this kind of a worship service of any kind is broadcast on German TV, why would you be a priest there? Why would you be a priest in a country where the bishops all practically universally say the church got it wrong on the James Martin topic? That the Bible is wrong on it. Why would you participate in the synodal revolution in Germany, which is ground zero for it? Here's the source that he shared, by the way. It comes from de.statista.com. This is a statistics gathering organization out of Germany. None of this is good news, to be sure. And, you know, the sources of the DBK, and you can go into more details if you want to take a look at this when I post the show notes later today. But is anybody surprised by this? You shouldn't be. It's all connected. Every topic we talked about today, all connected. I'm very curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments. Beverly says, I wonder how such people even get to look at RTTR like Jake the producer wouldn't put up with it. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but some unsavory language has popped up in the chat. So I'm going to have to police some things here, it looks like. But there we go. I'm curious, though, as a general rule, what you think about all this. So let me know in the comments. Please pray for everybody who spoke about today. Pope Leo, the German bishops, all of them. Pray for them. They need your prayers. Their souls are on the line, just like the souls of the people who they influence. Given that we're talking about bishops and popes here, it's a big deal. It's a lot of them. The crisis in the church has not abated, and it will not abate until God deems the time is right for it. And the only thing I can tell you is if you want to do your part to help end this crisis in the church. No, this is not a pitch for Patreon, for those who are cynical watching this. This is a pitch for you to look at your calendar and make time to start the 5 First Saturdays devotion. Asked for by Our Lady of Fatima, told to Sister Lucia in the 1920s. It involves doing acts of reparation under specific circumstances and for specific offenses, and going to Mass 5 consecutive times on the first Saturday of the month. No, don't try to use a vigil Mass for it. Don't try to double up. Don't try to cut corners on it. You'll find, if you can, find a daily Mass at least on a Saturday morning, which are hard to do, or a traditional parish will often have on a first Saturday, a devoted first Saturday Mass. I have heard of ordinary form parishes with a dedicated first Saturday Mass, but they're extraordinarily rare. But whatever you do, find it, learn the details of the 5 First Saturdays devotion, and yes, I have videos on this channel about it, and keep them. You're going to find, by the way, that if normally Saturdays aren't something that you have a problem doing, that you've got, a lot of free time, So your day to relax, really. You don't have a lot going on. You're going to suddenly find when you start the 5 First Saturdays devotion that people are going to do everything in their power to put obstacles in your way to completing it. Take that as a sign that the devil doesn't want you completing the 5 First Saturdays devotion. Our Lady of Fatima told Sister Lucia to promote the 5 First Saturdays devotion. Try to complete it at least once. Let me know in the comments if you've completed the 5 First Saturdays devotion, or if you've attempted to start the 5 First Saturdays devotion and exactly what I said did happen, which is all of a sudden people try to get in your way on a Saturday when they didn't before. Or other weird things would happen to try to get in your way of completing the devotion. Let me know what you think of this, though, in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot, too. And as always, pray for the church. And Benedictaria, thank you for becoming a channel member. I'm Anthony Stine.